The morning sun cast long shadows across the glass towers of downtown Phoenix as Jasmine Mitchell adjusted her leather briefcase and checked her reflection in the lobby windows of Sterling Tech Industries. Her navy blue suit was perfectly pressed, her hair styled in an elegant updo, and her confidence radiated from every step she took toward the reception desk. She had no idea that in less than 15 minutes, her world would be turned upside down in the most humiliating way possible, only to witness justice unfold in a way that would change everything forever. Jasmine had been married to Marcus Mitchell, CEO of Sterling Tech Industries, for 12 years. She understood the weight of being a black woman in corporate America, having carved out her own successful career as a senior partner at Phoenix's most prestigious law firm. Today, she was delivering crucial merger documents that would finalize Sterling Tech's acquisition of a smaller competitor. The deal was worth $250 million. And the contracts in her briefcase would seal the agreement that Marcus had been working on for 18 months. She approached the reception desk with the same professional demeanor that had earned her respect in countless boardrooms. Unaware that her race would override her credentials in the eyes of some Sterling Tech employees, the Sterling Tech lobby was a masterpiece of modern design, with polished marble floors that reflected the afternoon light streaming through floor-to-ceiling windows. Crystal chandeliers hung from the soaring ceiling, and expensive artwork adorned the walls. It was a space designed to impress visitors and clients, a testament to the company's success and prestige. Behind the curved reception desk sat Isabella Rodriguez, a young woman who had been working at Sterling Tech for only 6 months. She looked up as Jasmine approached, her smile genuine and welcoming. However, across the lobby, Regional Manager Derek Thompson was watching the interaction with growing suspicion and disdain. At 42 years old, Derek had worked his way up through the company ranks, but his success had been built more on politics than performance, and his prejudices ran deeper than he would ever admit to himself. Derek Thompson straightened his tie and walked purposefully across the marble floor, his footsteps echoing in the spacious lobby. He had noticed Jasmine the moment she entered, and something about her confident stride and expensive accessories had triggered his worst instincts. In his mind, a black woman dressed so well could only be up to no good in a place like Sterling Tech. He approached the reception desk just as Isabella was preparing to call upstairs to announce Jasmine's arrival. Derek's voice cut through the quiet atmosphere like a knife, sharp and accusatory, drawing the attention of everyone within earshot. The transformation from professional courtesy to racial hostility happened in an instant, and Jasmine felt her stomach drop as she realized what was about to unfold. "What are you doing here?" Derek's voice boomed across the pristine lobby, causing conversations to stop and heads to turn. His eyes swept over Jasmine from head to toe with undisguised contempt. Did security let another one slip through? The racist undertone in his words hung in the air like poison, and Jasmine felt the familiar sting of discrimination that she had hoped to leave behind in corporate America's past. Derek continued his verbal assault, his voice growing louder and more aggressive with each word. "You people always think you can waltz into places you don't belong. Well, not on my watch." The lobby had fallen completely silent except for the soft hum of air conditioning and the distant sound of elevator chimes. Employees and visitors stood frozen, their phones beginning to emerge from pockets as they sensed something significant was about to happen. Isabella Rodriguez looked between Derek and Jasmine with growing alarm. She had been properly trained on visitor protocols and knew that Jasmine had presented valid credentials for CEO O-level access. Her visitor badge was legitimate, her appointment was confirmed, and her professional demeanor suggested nothing suspicious. Isabella tried to intervene, her voice shaking slightly as she addressed Derek. "Sir, Mrs. Mitchell has proper visitor credentials. She's here for an appointment with Mr. Mitchell." But Derek's prejudice had taken complete control of the situation. He dismissed Isabella's professional assessment with a wave of his hand, his anger escalating rather than subsiding. The young receptionist stepped back, recognizing that she was witnessing something that would have serious consequences for everyone involved without warning. Derek grabbed his 20-ounce Pepsi from a nearby table and made a decision that would destroy his career in the most public way imaginable. He slowly, deliberately raised the bottle above Jasmine's head, his eyes filled with malicious satisfaction. "This is what happens when people forget their place," he snarled, then poured the entire contents over her head. Cola cascaded down Jasmine's face, soaking her $400 silk blouse and ruining her expensive leather briefcase. The sticky liquid dripped onto the marble floor, creating dark puddles around her feet. Important merger documents floated in the brown mess, their pages dissolving into illegible fragments. The sound of liquid hitting marble echoed through the stunned silence of the lobby. Jasmine stood motionless, cola dripping from her hair onto her designer heels. She did not scream, did not cry, did not lose her composure in any way. Instead, she reached into her purse with steady hands and pulled out her phone, beginning to photograph everything with the calm precision of someone who understood that documentation would be crucial. She checked her gold watch through the sticky mess covering her wrist. 2:47, she murmured quietly. 13 minutes until 3 o'clock. Her voice was steady and controlled, but those who knew her well would recognize the steel. Beneath her calm exterior, she was not just a victim in this moment. She was a lawyer gathering evidence, and Derek Thompson had just created the most expensive mistake of his career. 15 employees and visitors stood frozen in the lobby, their phones now fully deployed as they recorded the aftermath of Derek's attack. The initial shock was giving way to a growing understanding that they were witnessing something historic. This was not just workplace harassment. This was a publicly documented act of racial discrimination against the CEO's wife, captured on multiple devices and already being uploaded to social media platforms. Marketing coordinator Jennifer Walsh held her phone steady as she recorded, her journalism background telling her that this story would have national implications. Security guard Antonio Martinez approached slowly, his radio crackling with communications from other floors. He had worked in corporate security for 15 years and had never seen a situation escalate so quickly or with such devastating potential consequences. Derek Thompson stood over Jasmine with his chest puffed out in satisfaction, apparently believing that he had successfully put someone in their place. He adjusted his tie and smoothed his hair, his security badge dangling from his neck as he surveyed his handiwork. "That's what happens when people forget their place," he repeated, his voice carrying across the silent lobby. He seemed completely unaware that he had just committed career suicide in the most public way possible. The employees watching him began to realize that they were seeing a man destroy himself in real time, and many of them would later describe this moment as both horrifying and fascinating. Derek's confidence would last exactly 10 more minutes. But those 10 minutes would feel like an eternity for everyone present. Jasmine knelt gracefully despite her soaked clothing and began gathering the soggy documents scattered across the marble floor. Her briefcase bore the embossed logo of Mitchell & Associates, Phoenix's most prestigious law firm, and several of the waterlogged papers showed partial letterheads reading, "Confidential CEO only," and "Sterling acquisition documents." These were not random papers. They were legal documents worth millions of dollars, now floating in cola puddles because of one man's racial prejudice. As she collected the ruined contracts, Jasmine's phone buzzed repeatedly with incoming calls. The caller ID showed Marcus, but she declined each call, knowing that her husband was in a crucial board meeting and would soon discover what had happened in the most dramatic way possible. Junior Executive Patricia Chen watched from the elevator, bank her iPhone recording discreetly as she tried to process what she had just witnessed. She had worked at Sterling Tech for 2 years and had never seen Derek Thompson behave so aggressively toward anyone. Something about this situation felt fundamentally different from typical workplace conflicts. The woman Derek had attacked carried herself with too much confidence, wore clothes that were too expensive, and handled the humiliation with too much composure for this to be a simple case of mistaken identity. Patricia's instincts told her that Derek had made a terrible mistake, and she continued recording because she suspected the consequences would be swift and severe. "Ma'am," Antonio Martinez said gently as he approached Jasmine, "I need to ask, what brings you here today?" His voice was professional but tinged with concern as he watched her calmly document the scene. Jasmine looked up from where she knelt among the scattered papers, cola still dripping from her hair but her dignity intact. "I'm delivering time-sensitive merger documents to my husband," she replied with quiet strength. "Marcus is expecting these for his 3 o'clock board meeting." Antonio's eyebrows rose slightly as he processed her words. The access level on her visitor badge suddenly made perfect sense, and he began to understand the magnitude of what Derek had just done. Derek snatched the visitor badge from Antonio's hands before the security guard could examine it closely. "Fake, obviously fake," he declared, waving the badge in the air like evidence of a crime. "You think we're stupid?" "David, you mean Mr. Mitchell, like the CEO would associate with?" He paused, searching for words that would express his bigotry without saying something that could be used against him in court. But Jasmine's voice cut through his rant like ice, stopping him mid-sentence and sending a chill through everyone. "Present? With what, exactly?" she asked, her tone deadly quiet. The lobby fell so silent that people could hear their own heartbeats. Derek's face turned red as he realized that his racist implications were being documented by multiple cameras. But his prejudice had taken such complete control that he could not stop himself from digging his hole deeper. Assistant Manager Helen Carter emerged from the elevator, drawn by the commotion and the crowd of employees gathered in the lobby. At 36, she had built her career by never challenging authority and always supporting management decisions, even when they made her uncomfortable. She sized up the situation quickly. Black woman, expensive clothes, confrontation with Derek Thompson. Without conducting any investigation or asking any questions, she positioned herself beside Derek in a show of solidarity. "Is there a problem here?" Helen asked, her tone making it clear that she considered Jasmine to be the problem. Derek's relief at having support was visible as he straightened his shoulders and prepared to justify his actions to someone who would automatically take his side. "Just removing an unwanted visitor," Derek replied with renewed confidence. "Someone who thinks she can waltz in here, claiming to know the CEO personally." Helen's eyes narrowed as she studied Jasmine's appearance, taking in the expensive jewelry, the designer handbag, and the professional briefcase. Despite being covered in cola, everything about Jasmine screamed money and class. But Helen's prejudices made her dismiss these obvious signs of legitimacy. Security should have screened her properly, Helen declared. "Antonio, how did she get past the front desk?" The implication that Antonio had failed in his duties hung in the air, even though Isabella had followed proper protocols and Derek had ignored her professional assessment. Antonio looked between the visitor badge in Derek's hand and Jasmine's calm demeanor, his security training warring with the racial dynamics unfolding before him. "She has proper credentials," he said carefully. "VIP access badge, signed visitor log, confirmed appointment." His words carried weight because Antonio was known for his thoroughness and professionalism, but Helen dismissed his assessment with a wave of her hand. "Those can be forged," she interrupted. "Derek's right to be cautious. We've had issues with corporate espionage lately." The accusation hung in the air like smoke, and everyone present understood that Helen was now actively participating in The discrimination rather than investigating the situation properly. Jasmine continued photographing everything with methodical precision. Each image would become evidence in what everyone was beginning to realize would be a historic discrimination case. Her phone captured Derek's aggressive posture, Helen's supportive stance, the scattered documents, the pools of cola on marble floors, and the faces of employees who chose to stand by and watch rather than intervene. The timestamp on each photo would prove exactly when each element of the harassment occurred, creating an undeniable timeline of events. Her legal training had taught her that documentation was everything, and she was building a case that would be impossible to dispute or minimize. 10 minutes, Jasmine murmured, checking her watch again through the sticky mess. 10 minutes until what? Derek demanded, his paranoia growing as he watched her calm documentation of his attack. Until your accomplices arrive. Until you complete whatever scheme you're running. His accusations were becoming increasingly desperate and unhinged, but Jasmine's steady composure was making him look more unstable by the minute. The employees watching began to realize that Derek was losing control of the situation, even though he seemed to believe he was in command. The countdown that Jasmine was maintaining added an element of suspense that had everyone on edge. Wondering what would happen when those 10 minutes expired, Isabella Rodriguez bit her lip as she watched the confrontation unfold, glancing between the chaos and her computer screen. She had seen Jasmine's name in the visitor logs multiple times over the past year, always with VIP clearance, always requesting CEO access, always treated with the utmost respect by senior executives. The pattern was clear to anyone who bothered to look, but Derek and Helen were too blinded by their prejudices to see the obvious truth. Isabella wanted to speak up, wanted to show them the historical records that would prove Jasmine's legitimacy. But she was a junior employee afraid of retaliation from managers who had already demonstrated their willingness to abuse their authority. "Sir," Isabella said quietly, trying one more time to prevent the disaster from escalating further. "Maybe I should call upstairs and verify," but Helen cut her off before she could finish the sentence. "You'll do no such thing," Helen snapped. "We handle our own security issues down here. There's no need to bother the executive floor with this nonsense." The dismissal was sharp and final, and Isabella stepped back with tears of frustration in her eyes. She understood that she was watching something terrible unfold. But her position in the company hierarchy left her powerless to stop it. The documentation she could provide would have ended the confrontation immediately. But Helen's authoritarian approach had shut down any possibility of verification. Jasmine's phone buzzed again. And this time, the text message was visible to people standing nearby. "Merger contracts needed immediately. Board meeting moved to 2:55. Where are you? Marcus." The urgency in the message was clear, and several employees exchanged glances as they began to understand that the woman Derek had attacked was not just connected to the CEO, she was essential to a critical business meeting that was about to begin. The pieces of the puzzle were falling into place for those who were paying attention, but Derek and Helen remained willfully blind to the evidence mounting around them. Well-dressed executive Thomas Rodriguez approached from the coffee station, drawn by the escalating voices and the crowd of employees. He'd been watching the scene unfold with growing unease, his business instincts telling him that something was very wrong about the entire situation. Thomas had worked in corporate environments long enough to recognize when junior managers were making career-ending mistakes, and he could see that Derek Thompson was walking straight off a cliff. "Derek, what's all the shouting about?" Thomas asked, his tone carefully neutral as he assessed the situation. "Just handling a security breach, Tom," Derek replied, his confidence returning at having another witness to his authority. "Nothing you need to worry about." But Thomas was studying Jasmine carefully, taking in her expensive briefcase. Her professional demeanor, despite being soaked in soda, and her methodical documentation of everything happening around her. His business experience told him that this woman was not what Derek was claiming her to be, and his next question would begin to unravel Derek's entire narrative. "Ma'am, are you all right?" Thomas asked gently, his concern genuine as he watched. Cola dripped from Jasmine's hair. "Do you need medical attention or assistance?" His professional courtesy stood in stark contrast to Derek and Helen's hostility. And his question gave Jasmine an opening to state her case to someone who might actually listen. "I'm fine, thank you," Jasmine replied with quiet dignity. "I just need to deliver these documents to my husband." 7 minutes until his board meeting starts, and he's expecting the Sterling acquisition contracts. Thomas's face went pale as the words hit him. He knew about the Sterling acquisition because he worked in the mergers and acquisitions department. The deal was worth $250 million and required board approval that afternoon. The contracts Jasmine was trying to deliver were not just important, they were absolutely critical to the company's immediate future. "Derek," Thomas said slowly, his voice taking on a warning tone. "Maybe we should verify this woman's credentials before," but Derek cut him off with an angry gesture. "Stay out of this, Tom," Derek snapped. "I've got everything under control. This woman is obviously running some kind of scam, and I won't let her con her way into our executive offices." Derek's certainty was absolute and absolutely wrong. But his prejudice had created a reality, distortion field that made him incapable of seeing the truth even when it was being presented to him by colleagues he normally respected. Thomas stepped back, recognizing that Derek was beyond reasoning with, but his business instincts were screaming that a disaster was about to unfold. Isabella's computer chimed with an instant message that made her heart race. The message was from Marcus Mitchell's executive assistant. "Is Mrs. Mitchell downstairs? CEO is looking for merger documents and getting concerned about timing." Isabella's hands trembled as she read the words, understanding finally and completely that Derek Thompson had just attacked the CEO's wife. She looked at Jasmine, then at Derek, then back at her computer screen, paralyzed by the magnitude of what she was witnessing. The countdown Jasmine had been maintaining suddenly took on terrifying significance. In just a few minutes, everything was going to change in the most dramatic way possible. The lobby had filled with employees from various departments. Drawn by the commotion and the growing crowd, phones were everywhere, recording from multiple angles as people sensed they were witnessing something historic. Social media notifications were already beginning to ping as early uploads started gaining traction. The hashtag Sterling Tech incident was about to trend nationally, and Derek Thompson was about to become the face of corporate racism in America. But for now, in these final minutes before his world collapsed, Derek remained confident that he had successfully defended his company against an unwanted intruder. 5 minutes, Jasmine said softly, checking her watch one final time. The tension in the lobby reached a breaking point as everyone waited to see what would happen when those 5 minutes expired. Derek stood over her with his arms crossed, still believing he was in control of the situation. Helen maintained her supportive stance, equally convinced that they had handled a potential security threat properly. Thomas and Antonio exchanged worried glances, both sensing that something terrible was about to happen. Isabella sat frozen at her desk, the CEO's message burning on her computer screen, and Jasmine knelt among the scattered merger documents, documenting everything with the steady hands of someone who understood that justice was coming. Even if it had to wait exactly 5 more minutes, the elevator chimed with mechanical precision, its doors sliding open to reveal Marcus Mitchell in an expensive charcoal suit. At 6 feet 4 inches tall, with the commanding presence that came from building a company worth $3 billion. Marcus immediately dominated the lobby. His eyes swept across the crowd of employees, the scattered papers floating in cola puddles, and the woman kneeling in the center of it all. When his gaze landed on his wife, the transformation in his expression was instant and terrifying. Confusion gave way to recognition, then to a scold fury that seemed to drop the temperature in the lobby by 10 degrees. "Jasmine," Marcus said, his voice carrying across the silent space with the authority of someone accustomed to commanding boardrooms full of powerful executives. "What happened to you?" The question was simple, but the tone promised consequences that would reshape Sterling. Tech, forever. Derek Thompson's confident expression cracked like glass as he realized that the woman he had humiliated was not just connected to the CEO, she was married to him. The man who controlled his salary, his career prospects, and his future was staring at his wife covered in cola while dozens of employees recorded every moment. The silence in the lobby was deafening as Derek's world began to collapse around him. His mouth opened and closed soundlessly, his brain unable to process the magnitude of his mistake. Helen Carter took an unconscious step backward, her face going white as she understood that her support of Derek's actions had just destroyed her career, along with his. Thomas Rodriguez closed his eyes briefly, recognizing that he was witnessing corporate history in the making. Isabella finally found her voice, but it came out as barely a whisper as she watched the most powerful man in the company survey the scene of his wife's humiliation. "I brought your merger documents," Jasmine said with the same calm composure she had maintained throughout the ordeal. They got a little wet. Her understated description of being attacked with soda drew a bitter smile from Marcus as he processed not just what had happened, but how his wife had handled it. In 12 years of marriage, he had learned to read the steel beneath her quiet strength, and he could see that she had spent the last 15 minutes building a case rather than simply enduring abuse. The scattered documents, the photographic evidence, the crowd of witnesses, everything had been carefully documented for maximum impact. Marcus moved closer to his wife, his protective instincts flaring as he took in her soaked clothing and the dignified way she was gathering the ruined contracts. Behind him, the elevator doors opened again to disgorge 6 senior executives who had been searching the building for the missing merger documents. Their faces registered shock as they took in the scene, the CEO's wife kneeling in cola puddles, while employees stood around recording with their phones. The Sterling acquisition, worth $250 million, was supposed to be signed in less than 3 minutes, but the contracts were floating in sticky brown liquid on marble floors. "Someone explain to me," Marcus said, his voice dropping to a deadly, quiet tone that every executive in the company had learned to fear, "why my wife is covered in Pepsi." The silence that followed was profound and terrifying. Derek Thompson, the man who had been so vocal just minutes before, seemed to have lost the ability to speak entirely. Sweat beaded on his forehead as he realized that his career was not just over. It was about to be publicly and spectacularly destroyed in front of an audience of his colleagues and subordinates. Antonio Martinez stepped forward, his security training overriding his shock at the situation. "Sir, there was a misunderstanding about Mrs. Mitchell's visitor credentials," he said carefully, his words precise and professional. "A misunderstanding," Marcus repeated, his eyebrows rising as he processed the security guard's diplomatic phrasing. "Antonio, my wife has been visiting this office monthly for 5 years. Her photograph is displayed in the main conference room. She spoke at our last company meeting and established our diversity scholarship program. What exactly was there to misunderstand?" The accusation hung in the air like a sword waiting to fall. Everyone in the lobby understood that Marcus was not asking for information, he was building a case. Derek Thompson had not just made a mistake or shown poor judgment. He had deliberately chosen to humiliate a black woman despite having clear evidence of her legitimacy and authority. The racial dynamics of the situation were impossible to ignore, and Marcus's questions were making it clear that there would be serious consequences for what had transpired. Jennifer Walsh, who had been recording the entire incident, stepped forward, with her phone still capturing everything. "Mr. Mitchell," she said, her journalism background giving her the courage to speak when others remained silent. "I have video of the entire incident if you need documentation." Her offer was both helpful and damning, confirming that Derek's attack had been captured from multiple angles and would be preserved forever. The evidence was overwhelming and undeniable, creating a situation where Derek could not claim misunderstanding or minimize his actions. Marcus looked at his wife, who was still calmly photographing the scene and organizing the salvageable documents. "Jasmine, tell me exactly what happened here," he said, his tone gentler when addressing her, but still carrying the promise of swift justice. She held up her phone, showing him the sequence of photographs she had taken. "Derek Thompson poured soda on me because he decided I didn't belong here," she said with quiet precision. Helen Carter supported his decision. Everyone else watched it happen. The simplicity of her statement made it even more powerful. There were no accusations of conspiracy or complex discrimination schemes, just a straightforward description of racial prejudice in action. Marcus scrolled through the photographs on his wife's phone, his expression growing darker with each image. The timestamp proved that the harassment had continued for 15 minutes while his employees stood by and watched. The merger documents, worth hundreds of millions, were destroyed by one man's racist assumptions, and the incident had been documented so thoroughly that it would become a textbook case of workplace discrimination. "Derek Thompson," Marcus said, turning to face the regional manager, who was now visibly trembling. "You've worked here for how long?" His voice was conversational, almost friendly, which made the question even more terrifying. Derek's throat worked soundlessly as he struggled to find his voice. "For years, sir," he finally managed to croak out. His earlier confidence completely evaporated in the face of the CEO's controlled fury. "For years," Marcus repeated thoughtfully. "And in those 4 years, how many times has my wife visited this office?" The question was rhetorical because everyone present knew the answer. Derek had recognized Jasmine. His attack had been deliberate rather than mistaken. He had chosen to humiliate her despite knowing exactly who she was and what her connection to the company meant. The malice behind his actions made them infinitely worse than simple ignorance would have been. Helen Carter attempted to salvage her career with desperate damage control. "Sir, we were just being cautious about corporate security," she said, her voice shaking as she realized how weak her justification sounded. "There have been incidents with unauthorized visitors, and we thought it was better to err on the side of caution." But Marcus's response cut through her excuses like a laser, through paper. "Helen," he said, his disappointment somehow more devastating than his anger would have been, "you stood there and watched Derek pour soda on my wife. You called her a con artist and blocked her access to the elevators. You participated in racially motivated harassment of a black woman while dozens of employees recorded every moment. There is no justification for what you did, and there will be serious consequences." The crowd of employees began to understand that they were witnessing more than just the firing of 2 managers. This was a moment that would define Sterling Tech's culture going forward, a line being drawn between acceptable and unacceptable behavior that would reshape how the company operated. Social media was already exploding with preliminary reports of the incident, and news outlets were beginning to pick up the story. The Sterling Tech discrimination case was about to become national news, and Derek Thompson's name would become synonymous with workplace racism in corporate America. Marcus pulled out his phone and sent a message that would be received by every executive in the building. "All department heads to lobby immediately. Emergency personnel situation requires immediate attention." Within minutes, the elevator doors opened to reveal the entire senior leadership team of Sterling Tech Industries. Their faces showed confusion that quickly shifted to horror as they took in the scene. The CEO's wife, soaked in cola, gathering merger documents from puddles while dozens of employees recorded everything on their phones. "Ladies and gentlemen," Marcus announced to his assembled leadership team, "meet the perpetrators of what will become Sterling Tech's most expensive discrimination incident in company history." His words were precise and damning, making it clear that legal and financial consequences would be severe. The executives exchanged glances, understanding that they were looking at a lawsuit that could cost the company millions of dollars in damage, its reputation for years to come. Chief Legal Counsel Amanda Foster stepped forward with her tablet, already open, ready to begin damage control procedures. "Mrs. Mitchell, are you injured? Do you require medical attention?" she asked, her legal training taking over as she assessed the situation. "I'm fine, Amanda," Jasmine replied, "but thank you for being the first person to show concern for my well-being in the past 18 minutes. The subtle reproach in her words carried weight because Amanda Foster was known for her professionalism and basic human decency. Marcus turned to Derek Thompson, who looked like he wanted to disappear into the marble floor. "Derek, you poured soda on my wife," he said, his voice carrying across the silent lobby. "You made racist comments about her appearance and her right to be in this building. You refused to verify her legitimate credentials and called security to have her forcibly removed. Each of these actions represents a terminable offense under company policy." The formal language made it clear that Derek's firing was not emotional retaliation, but a necessary business decision based on documented policy violations. And Helen Marcus continued, "You actively participated in the harassment. You supported Derek's decision to humiliate my wife and blocked her access to the elevators. You have 6 formal complaints against you for similar behavior, all of which were inadequately addressed by human resources." The revelation that Helen had a history of discriminatory behavior sent shockwaves through the crowd. This was not an isolated incident, but part of a pattern that Sterling Tech had failed to address properly. The assembled executives began to understand that this moment represented more than just personnel changes. It was an opportunity to address systemic problems that had been ignored for too long. Marcus was not just firing to employees. He was sending a message about the kind of company culture that would be tolerated going forward. The incident with Jasmine had exposed weaknesses in Sterling Tech's diversity and inclusion programs that would require comprehensive reform. Effective immediately, Marcus announced, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had built a billion-dollar company from nothing. "Derek Thompson is terminated for cause number severance, no references, complete forfeiture of stock options." Derek's knees buckled as he realized that his $134,000 salary, his annual bonus, and his retirement savings were gone forever. The man who had felt so powerful 18 minutes ago was now unemployed with no prospects for recovery in corporate America. "Helen Carter is suspended, pending a complete investigation of her conduct," Marcus continued. "If Human Resources determines that her participation warrants termination, she will join Derek in the unemployment line." The threat was clear and would likely become reality, given Helen's history of similar incidents. Her 20-year career at Sterling Tech was effectively over, destroyed by 18 minutes of racist behavior that had been captured on multiple cameras. But Marcus was not finished delivering consequences. "Isabella Rodriguez, you followed proper protocols and attempted to prevent this incident. You're being promoted to Executive Relations Coordinator with a $20,000 raise, effective immediately." The young woman gasped in surprise as her career took a dramatic positive turn because she had done the right thing under difficult circumstances. "Antonio Martinez, you maintained professionalism throughout this incident and attempted to de-escalate the situation. You're being promoted to Director of Building security with a $25,000 raise and oversight of all Sterling Tech security operations. The promotion was both a reward for Antonio's professionalism and a statement about the kind of leadership Sterling Tech wanted in security positions. The swift delivery of both punishment and rewards sent a clear message to everyone present. Racist behavior would be met with immediate termination, but employees who demonstrated integrity under pressure would be recognized and advanced. The cultural transformation was happening in real time, witnessed by dozens of employees and recorded for posterity on social media platforms. Jasmine stood up slowly, her dignity intact despite her soaked clothing and the humiliating ordeal she had endured. "Marcus," she said softly, "this isn't just about punishment. It's about prevention. We need to ensure this never happens to anyone else." Her words carried the wisdom of someone who had experienced discrimination firsthand and understood that individual consequences were only the beginning of necessary changes. Marcus nodded, recognizing that his wife's perspective would be crucial in developing comprehensive reforms. "You're absolutely right," he said, then addressed the crowd of employees who were still recording everything. "Effective immediately, Sterling Tech will implement mandatory bias training for all employees. We will establish an anonymous reporting system for discrimination incidents. We will conduct quarterly diversity audits of all departments, and executive compensation will be tied to diversity metrics, ensuring that our leadership has financial incentives to create an inclusive workplace." The announcements represented a complete overhaul of Sterling Tech's approach to diversity and inclusion. The incident with Jasmine had exposed systematic problems that required systematic solutions. Marcus was using his wife's humiliation as a catalyst for transforming the company culture in ways that would protect future employees from similar experiences. Chief Financial Officer Robert Kim was already calculating the costs of the proposed changes. "The financial impact will be significant," he said, "but considerably less expensive than the lawsuit we're facing and the reputation damage we've suffered." His pragmatic assessment confirmed that the reforms were not just morally necessary, but financially sensible. Derek Thompson made one final attempt to salvage something from the wreckage of his career. "This isn't fair," he said, his voice cracking with desperation. "I was just trying to protect the company from security threats. How was I supposed to know she was the CEO's wife?" But his protest only made things worse by confirming that his behavior had been based on racist assumptions about who belonged in corporate spaces. "Derek," Marcus replied, his voice cold with finality, "you weren't supposed to know she was my wife. You were supposed to treat her with basic human respect because she's a human being. Your failure to do that reveals everything we need to know about your character and your fitness for employment at this company." The response was devastating because it addressed the moral core of Derek's behavior rather than just the practical consequences. 6 months later, Sterling Tech Industries had been transformed into one of the most diverse and inclusive companies. In the technology sector, the incident with Jasmine Mitchell had become a case study in business schools across the country, demonstrating how leadership could turn crisis into opportunity. Derek Thompson's name had become synonymous with workplace racism, ensuring that he would never work in corporate America again. Helen Carter had been terminated after the investigation confirmed a pattern of discriminatory behavior spanning several years. But the most important changes were in the daily experiences of Sterling Tech employees. Anonymous reporting had led to early intervention in dozens of potential discrimination cases. Bias training had created awareness and accountability throughout the organization. Diverse hiring practices had brought new perspectives and talents into every department. The company's stock price had actually increased as investors recognized that inclusive companies were more innovative and profitable than their competitors. Jasmine Mitchell stood before a packed auditorium at the National Business Diversity Conference, her story having become a powerful example of how individual courage could create systemic change. They saw a black woman and decided I didn't belong, she said, her voice carrying across the silent room. What they didn't see was someone who would turn their hatred into a force for transformation. Her speech would be viewed millions of times online, inspiring other discrimination victims to document their experiences and demand justice. The viral video of Derek Thelto Thompson pouring soda on Jasmine had been watched by over 50 million people, becoming one of the most shared examples of workplace discrimination ever recorded. But more importantly, it had sparked conversations in corporate boardrooms across America about the need for comprehensive diversity and inclusion programs. Sterling Tech's response had set a new standard for how companies should address discrimination incidents, and dozens of other organizations had adopted similar reforms. Marcus Mitchell's leadership during the crisis had elevated his reputation in the business community, demonstrating that decisive action against discrimination was not just morally right, but strategically smart. Sterling Tech's transformation had attracted top talent from competitors and created a workplace culture that fostered innovation and excellence. The company's financial performance had improved dramatically as diverse perspectives drove creative solutions and expanded market opportunities. The story of how a manager's racist